Hi there, I'm Samuel Doveri Vesterbye, Director of the ENC and host of the MEDIATIZED EU podcast series. Today, we're continuing our deep dive into the MEDIATIZED EU project, a four-year initiative funded by the European Union through the Horizon program. And this project brings together partners from 7 countries, Belgium, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Estonia, Hungary, and very importantly, Georgia. In previous episodes, we've divided into early stages of our research, discussing key findings from desk research, policy scoping report, media analysis, and shared insights from interviews with political and media elites in each of the countries I mentioned. We've shed light on the dominant discourses about the EU and their influence on policymakers and journalists in the media and elsewhere. And at this point, our teams have already conducted nationwide surveys, and we've held discussions with various public groups. And the findings of these efforts are a rich perspective on the state of debate around the European project and also about how it's represented in public opinion in each country. And today we're having an unusual case because in some ways in the other countries we're studying Europeanization from both a theoretical and a practical point of view. But today we're looking at Georgia, and Georgia, of course, is in the news because it has an illegitimate government that has essentially rigged an election, and it has protests across many of its regions and all of its major cities. And so the concept of Europeanization, where we see people in the news waving Georgian and European flags for democracy side by side, is extremely relevant to our study and to our work. And so today I'm joined by my colleague from Georgia, Dr. Lika Tsuladze, who is the executive director of Center for Social Sciences and also an associate professor of sociology at Tbilisi State University, and also very much in charge of the research for this Horizon program. So Lika will discuss the findings from their country, Georgia, and also offer deep insights into, well, not only how is the EU portrayed there, but what is actually happening on the ground in terms of protest and the sentiment and fight for Europeanization on a day-to-day basis. I believe today we're maybe the 20th or 21st day of protest since the elections. And so let me pretty much start by welcoming you, Lika, and thanking you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Samuel. It's the 22nd day actually today. And but we can say that it's the 22nd day of this protest, started after the rigged elections. But in 2024, we have been out in the street for, I don't know, for a few months already, because in spring, in April and May, for 50 days, we were also protesting the so-called foreign agents, reintroduction of the so-called foreign agents law, as you know, which was actually reintroduced the second time in 2023. It was first introduced, people do not really know that, in 2017, but it was immediately turned down by the parliament back then, and then it was reintroduced in 2023. And after the 3-day massive protest, the prime minister promised to never put it on the agenda again, but they could not keep their word even for a year, and it was reintroduced the third time in April 2024. So we have been protesting pretty much in 2024 for a few months. We have been protesting against the illiberal laws introduced by the government, not only the foreign agents law tailored after the similar law in Russia, but also the so-called anti-LGBT propaganda law that followed the foreign agents law, and other similar illiberal legislative initiatives that followed after these two laws. So we are pretty much in the condition of fast decline in democracy. And as I was telling my colleagues before, we quickly passed through the stage of the so-called urbanization, and even through the so-called stage of Belarusization. And I would say, and I dare say, that now the government is we do not have the government, sorry, we have the ruling party. So the ruling party is introducing other illiberal laws, crafting them on the ground just to deal with the ongoing protest immediately in the streets, just to block the people from protesting, even developing very civil, they of course attacking the civil sector, but they also attack the public sector and develop various laws on the ground, as I said, against the public sector.
And all of this, I think, is particularly important because your country, Georgia, is on an accession process. Georgia was given a prospective membership. It was given a process to become an EU member eventually. However, now what has happened? That process is blocked.
Georgia received the candidate status a year ago, right? Back in December 2023. And it was very much political decision because the EU reiterated many times that it was Georgian people that received the status. It was not actually the government or now the ruling party that received the status, because the ruling party's hostile rhetoric toward the EU started back in 2021, and it's well evidenced by our publication, because within this project, we published a paper on Georgia's de-Europeanization as a discursive disengagement from the European Union's discourse, right? So we basically look at how the ruling party deviates from the EU and how it is accompanied by the very hostile discourse toward the EU. And in this paper, actually, we identify several phases of this discursive disengagement from the EU's normative discourse. The first stage, starting from the ruling party's withdrawal from Charles Michel's agreement until Russia's invasion of Ukraine, was already characterized, I would say, by EU hostile rhetoric, but this was rather moderate, I would say. That's why we called this phase as a we called it a defensive discourse, the ruling party's defensive discourse toward the EU, because in that period, basically the EU, it was actually the first time that the EU was the discourse that the ruling party of Georgian Dream was deviating from the European course. And the ruling party, of course, had to be defensive and its response was that, of course, it was not deviating from the European course, it was following firmly this course and so on. But after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and especially after June 2022, when Georgia was refused candidate status first time, right? The ruling party's discourse toward the EU became especially visibly hostile. And this phase, starting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Georgia's refusal to join the EU sanctions against Russia, we call the transition from defensive to offensive discourse. So after March 2022, and especially in June 2022, this discourse, offensive discourse, escalated, and it was basically the major discourse by the ruling party was that the EU was governed by the double standards against Georgia, asking Georgia to implement various reforms, to follow EU directives, but refusing to give certain incentives to reward Georgia in response. And of course, the major reward was the EU's candidate status, which Georgia was refused to get back in June 2022.
And so fast forward, and we're in a situation in which an election was held. The ODIHR clearly says that there's a violation of ballot secrecy on, I think, something like 20 or 25% of the vote, which is huge. And that's the let's say, like the most diplomatic of estimations, right, from ODIHR. And so we also have all these other reports from Transparency and other organizations who are saying, well, it's not only about voter secrecy, but there are like quantitative calculations that show discrepancy, that show that it's impossible that these votes went to Georgian Dream, the government. There's also a lot of evidence of this carousel voting, ballot stuffing. I mean, the list is quite endless, really. And I mean, by now, like you've had, member states, European Parliament, even people in the Commission saying, I mean, this is total election rigging and cannot be tolerated. Of course, there are problems because the EU is held back by one veto, namely Hungary, and that's blocking the whole kind of procedure of trying to actually implement policies that could change this situation. So that's where we're at right now. We have protests every single day. I think, Lika, you've been attending some of those protests, if not many of them. I mean, we've been studying this for 4 years. You specifically have been studying the concept of Europeanization, how it's portrayed in the media, how it's viewed by the public. And now you're living it day by day on the street, essentially. It doesn't get closer to reality than that. How do you see the study comparing to what's happening on the ground?
Right. Thank you for this question, because back in 2021, when we were doing the media analysis, and we already traced this process of de-Europeanization, because, actually my team and I were studying the Georgia's Europeanization process since 2014, when the association agreement was signed, which is already more than 10 years, right? And it's first time that we started talking not about Georgia's Europeanization, but unfortunately, about Georgia's de-Europeanization. And we already traced this process since 2021, July 2021, when the ruling party withdrew from Charles Michel's agreement. And we were alarmed back then already, because, after media analysis, we had in-depth interviews with political and media leads, and then the public opinion polls, like survey, nationwide representative survey. And I should say that all the stages of this research revealed two important things. One thing, which was even reflected in the population survey, it's the deviation discourse. The deviation discourse that was first revealed in the course of media analysis, then in the course of in-depth interviews with political and media leads, and even was reflected in the public survey. And this deviation discourse goes as follows. The ruling party of Georgian Dream is deviating from the European course. So this was already visible even to the public, which was revealed by the nationwide representative survey back in July, August 2023. Right?
So the population is way more Europeanized than the government.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, that's the case. Fortunately, that's the case. But unfortunately, all the institutions are captured by the ruling party that is governed by a single pro-Russian oligarch, and we do not have a leverage as us, the society. I mean, we do not have the leverage except for this massive peaceful protest, right? And all the institutions, we have these banners in the street right now. And as you noted before, I participate not in almost all, but all the protests. I haven't missed a single day, either in spring or right now. So I'm in the street all the time with my colleagues, with my students, with all my family members, with all my acquaintances. We are already like family. We are meeting each other, even like unknown people, but we see them on the street every day, and we say hello, we share food, we support each other. And, it's like we even decided there is already a New Year's celebration, like New Year's Eve, announced. All of us, yeah, like celebrating New Year in the street together, right? And I'm pretty sure Christmas will be celebrated the same way. So all of us standing outside in the street on the main avenue in front of the Parliament House and trying to maybe not reach through the ruling party, because I'm pretty desperate, and I would say there is no way of making them like hear us.
So
But then
the protest, in some ways, from what I understand, is the government won't listen because
no,
they're cemented into, I guess, pro-Russian business and
of course.
pro-Russian kind of,
Putin won't listen, right?
yeah.
Putin's puppets won't listen, but we push them, and we try to show that we are not scared, right? Because they have been using various ways to scare us. How the protest started, the first thing they did, they used robocops. These are special forces, and they attacked people. They physically beat people. They threaten people. They even kidnap people immediately from the streets. They kidnap opinion makers, young people who are very successful in their career, like, I don't know, artists, actors, poets, whoever. They just kidnap people, and like they started with beating people, and they could not scare people. Then they started using tear gas and water against the protesters, and the more they attacked protesters physically, the more people joined the protest. So this did not work. So they decided it was useless to have robocops all the time. Plus, robocops need to, they have this equipment like more than 20-25 kilos. They cannot run all the time after these young people, and these young people are really very active and healthy, and they can survive for quite a while. And then after a certain time, robocops were physically unable to run after these young people. Then businesses refused to provide robocops with food. There were tenders, and now for the last 2 days, none of the companies participates in the tenders because they refuse to provide food to the robocops.
Because, I mean, just for the context of the listener, correct me if I'm wrong, the average small and medium-sized business in Georgia might, number one, have a genuine European ideological identity inclination, as your study shows. But there's also the business component, which is one day an EPCA or a trade agreement between Georgia and the EU would make these businesses extremely wealthy, not only like the few oligarchs who are getting the
Right.
contracts from Russia, I guess.
Yes, actually, we have this online platform, freebusiness.org, and you can go there and see the businesses that joined protests and have these two major requirements the people have: new elections and freeing the political prisoners. So more and more businesses join, and even quite large businesses have joined, such as Coca-Cola Georgia, such as the main provider of the internet and telephone, mobile phone company like Nacticom, as well as some other companies. And plus, two largest banks of Georgia, TBC Bank and Bank of Georgia, have already many times expressed their support to people. And large pharmacies, the chains of pharmacies, provide protesters. They also join this platform, but also provide the protesters with masks, protective masks, special liquid like physiological liquid when they were poisoned by tear gas, and so on.
So Lika, just to understand, I mean, so like a lot of the business sector, in fact, maybe the majority of the business sector, are on board with the protest and against the government.
Small and medium businesses, yes.
Small and medium business.
Certain large businesses, especially the construction ones, try to not directly join because these construction businesses benefit from this ruling party most because they need to get permissions for constructions, and the town hall, city hall, the corrupt ones would take money and allow them to go on with construction whenever and wherever possible. And there are so many illegal constructions all around the country. So these large construction companies are the ones that haven't joined really this platform. And then there are some certain large businesses as well, but most of the medium and small size businesses have joined the platform, and more businesses join. They like even the restaurants feed people for free, the protesters, for example, and the museum cafe, which is in front of the Parliament House, the National Museum of Art, has been provided free tea and coffee to the protesters for 3 weeks already.
Yeah, it goes to
Every
show you.
day.
It goes to show you the not only the politicized sentiments, but the genuine deep sentiments of identity of what's going on in the country. And maybe let's come back on that question because the nationwide survey very much looks at Europeanization, sentiment of Europeanization. And from
Right.
what you're describing and what we can see is ongoing in Georgia at the moment, the sentiment among Georgians of absolutely being part of European identity and family is extremely deep. Can you tell us something about that?
Coming back to survey results, and I kind of started talking about that and then stopped. I said that there are two major findings, and I dealt with one. That was the deviation discourse that was reflected in all three stages of empirical research, and another important finding also reflected in all three stages of empirical research. I mean, media analysis, in-depth interviews with political media leads, and population survey is the finding that there is a very high political and media polarization in Georgia. And this polarization, I would say, is artificially aggravated by the ruling party, especially by its media outlets on a daily basis. The ruling party wants to depict the society as polarized, while in fact, I would say currently we have like two polarized poles, and this is not the society. This is the ruling party versus the society. And coming back to the survey results, which already confirmed that there was a very high political and media polarization in Georgia, I would say that the survey actually showed, directly responding to the call itself, MEDIATIZED EU, MEDIATIZED discourses on Europeanization, right? That the media consumption patterns have a significant impact on shaping the popular views. And one of the, especially towards the European Union, and Europeanization, because that's our main focus, right? But also towards the internal political situation and the perception of political crisis, because the research has shown that those who consume the pro-governmental media and the consumption generally of pro-governmental media outlets is positively correlated with less knowledge of the EU, more satisfaction with how the ruling party deals with EU relations, more inclination towards the conservative views, as well as with the positive perception of Russia, that's very important, and the perception of the EU as a threat to Georgia's national identity and sovereignty.
So,
So we see.
Lika, let me just stop you right there because, for the listener that might not know as much about this research as us, and the context as well. So here you describe, people who are watching majority Georgian Dream or government, directly party government media correlate
Right,
with these more conservative, pro-Russian, etc. views. But
right.
let's bring it back to the protests and what's happening on the street. Increasingly, more and more and more people are joining the protest. Increasingly, less and less people abide by the other side. My question, therefore, is does that then mean that the official government media and narrative is losing importance and trust? And number two, is it also possible that traditional media, like, for example, TV and so on, is simply not as relevant anymore, that a lot of people are online, on Facebook or whatever it may be, Instagram?
Right. That's a good question because yes, as we know, this survey was conducted back in summer 2023, right? And back then, and even till now, the studies show that more, let's say, more portion of the population watch pro-governmental media than anti-governmental media, pro-oppositional media. Some 18% of the population watched this media back in summer 2023, right? You might say 18% is not that much, but then the pro-oppositional media outlets were watched by less people. For example, the most vocal pro-opposition media outlet was watched like Doveri TV, in contrast to pro-governmental MEDIA TV, watched by around 10% of the population. And then there are two other pro-oppositional TV outlets, Formula and TV1, that were also watched by around 3-4% of the population. So I would say that the pro-governmental media voice reached the population, especially in the regions outside the capital and in the regions, more than the pro-oppositional media outlet. But what is important to note here is that even despite this, the portion of the population who was dissatisfied with how the ruling party dealt with EU-related issues was still much higher than the portion of those who was satisfied with how the government dealt with EU-related issues. So I would say that even despite the fact that pro-government media consumers were prevailed over, let's say, the pro-oppositional media consumers. Still, the population survey showed that the majority of the population was dissatisfied with how the ruling party dealt with the EU-related issues. So even in these conditions, and of course, 8%, 18%, sorry, of the population watching, and that is the majority of the media, traditional media consumption, right? Watching the pro-governmental media outlet. This is kind of the core that would support the government, right? And most of the people, and especially in the current situation of protests, when we immediately get the information from the ground, and when young people are involved so much in protests, of course, the traditional media is not that popular. And most of the people get information from social media, from the internet. And in Georgia, the most popular media outlet in terms of this information consumption is Facebook. All the live videos are from the protests are immediately uploaded on the Facebook. There are different Facebook groups supporting the protest and so on. And another one is Instagram, where all the photos of the protest, especially among young people, are disseminated, shared, and so on. So young people are pretty active, and not only young people, because older generation is using Facebook more than Instagram, but younger generation is using Instagram very actively, and all this recent ongoing information is immediately uploaded on these two media platforms. Right?
Exactly. I was going to say this fully corresponds with a lot of other studies as well, which show that literally month by month, people are consuming more social media, month by month, as opposed to traditional media. And number two, during moments of tension, conflict, where people know that governments are clamping down, people switch to social media because they want to see the truth. And so that's very interesting that you mentioned that. Listen, I have one more question I wanted to ask you, because in the context of what's happening in Georgia, when you look at it from, let's say, a more Western European perspective, whether you sit in Italy or Portugal or the Netherlands or whatever, something astonishing is happening. At least from my perspective, I've rarely, if ever, seen such protest and civic engagement of a Europeanization nature. right? So rarely do you see, I mean, you don't, during Belarus, during Ukraine and Maidan, you saw it, but during Belarus, you did not see it to the same degree. I mean, even in Turkey during the Gezi Park protest over a decade ago, it was not in the same perspective. What we're seeing today
Right.
in Georgia is essentially a fight to be able to say democratically, I belong in Europe. And you see it with the European flags, and it's something very strong and full of meaning, right? Beyond geopolitics in some ways. And so I have a question. I mean, you've had civic discussions, you've had discussions with people in the protest, like an ongoing civic discussion all the time, I guess. But also, how do you take all those civic discussions and the studying that we've been doing also in the surveying and with the focus groups and so on, and bring that into a recommendation? I mean, how do you take that and say, what should EU policymakers or EU member state policymakers focus on as a result? What should they take away from what's happening on the ground, your experience on the ground, and the study, this huge study that we've been doing for the past 4 years on this exact topic?
Yes, that's very important. Actually, I would say that our policy recommendations had two major blocks. One had to deal with depolarization of the discourses on Europeanization. Another one had to deal with fighting disinformation. And I would say that these are two major parts and two major aspects I would like to focus on right now, because our surveys findings have shown that indeed the consumption of pro-governmental media outlets positively correlates with more hostile attitudes toward the EU, more pro-Russian attitudes, and we see how pro-Russian and anti-EU propaganda is disseminated via the pro-governmental media outlets. So I think that, in fact, Britain, like the parliament, was discussing recently this issue of MEDIATIZED and the PMs were discussing that this media outlet, pro-governmental major and pro-governmental media outlets, is somehow owned through the offshore company related to England. So they are now investigating into the case. And even like outside the country, like Georgia, they are already paying attention to this propaganda instruments and how this pro-Russian, anti-EU, anti-Western propaganda media outlets should be handled, and maybe their support should be blocked from the Western countries, right?
At least it should be reevaluated.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you know that these kind of media outlets disseminate anti-EU, pro-Russian propaganda, and they operate through your country or through the companies based in your country, you should do something from inside, right?
Absolutely.
And then another important thing is that we do, because all the studies, all the phases of our research have clearly shown that the major issue here in Georgia is the political and media polarization, or rather political polarization that translates into media polarization via the consumption of the respective media outlets, that is partisan media. We should definitely deal with this issue, and we need to somehow start thinking seriously of this kind of depolarization, because we know that this is one of the major instruments of Russian authorities to let's say use their so-called sharp power against their target countries and to cause the disintegration within these countries, kind of the confusion from inside. That's why they use these two instruments, propaganda and disinformation on the one hand, and polarization, provoking polarization on the other hand. So we know that that happens not only in Georgia or other post-Soviet countries such as Moldova and Ukraine. That is very obvious, right? But also outside the post-Soviet space and in the within the EU countries, and like currently Hungary, Slovakia are good examples of that.
And one can even argue that big tech has a responsibility in here as well, in
Absolutely.
terms of regulating, but also in terms of having algorithms that don't totally run amok on polarization, which is ruining our societies.
And this big tech should be proactive and not reactive. They should not ban the propaganda after all the people, like we asked Meta to say ban certain propagandistic platforms, and then Meta responds, no, they should be responsible for not allowing the propagandistic messages and not waiting for us to report on this, propaganda channels, right? They should be proactive, not reactive, because if you are reactive, then something is already wrong, right? When the foreign agents law is adopted, something is already wrong. We should react before it is adopted, because then we see what results we get. That's why, and I hope the Georgian society will come out of this crisis much stronger, much united, and much more, let's say, reinforced in terms of developing true civil society, which we highly lacked because of the historical legacy of the Soviet tradition, whatever. But now we see how the new civil society is being born in Georgia. And that is one good outcome of all this political crisis, because I'm pretty sure the Georgians will not allow any political party to prevail solely in the parliament. And I'm pretty sure after this lesson, the Georgian parliament will be multi-party, and Georgians will be more aware, alarmed of the possible threats, and will be proactive rather than reactive. That is the case now, right? So I think,
so Lika, I will dare to say that if Georgia manages to muster through this difficult moment, hopefully with all the support it needs, we're actually talking about the possibility of developing a real democratic consolidation with a real civil society and a balanced judiciary and multi-party system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That would be probably, and I hope that will happen, because that would be the only case of peaceful political resistance against Russia as an imperial state, right? Because Russia is like physically attacking Ukraine, and Ukraine has to physically defend itself. In this case, Russia doesn't need to attack Georgia because it owns the Georgian ruling party. And if the people win this, that would be our winning over Russia's imperial ambitions in a political, peaceful way, right? And I think that this is why it's very important, because we do not have any leverage over Russia, of course, and over the Russian puppet ruling party. That's why we and all the state institutions are captured by this single oligarch and its puppets. That's why we do need the Western support. We need the EU support. We will do our best from inside, but we do need the support from outside. We need to feel that the people are not alone in this country. We need to see that, the sanctions are introduced against those violating human rights, beating and detaining people for no reason, and that none of the political party can afford, let's say, treating its population like that. That's why we do. Yeah, we do need the EU support in this case, like very harsh response to this government, because Putin's great plan, which he announced from the very beginning, is to restore Stalin's empire. And we know, all of us know, how Stalin's empire looked, right? it was not just Soviet Union. It was all the parts of Europe, including Eastern Germany. So all of us know pretty well that if Russia wins here, if Russia wins in Ukraine, then it will go further and grab Baltic states. It will then go further to Poland, and then will reach Germany. And I do not think Germans miss the Berlin Wall, right? So I think all of us should be alarmed, and all of us should try to stop Russia here and now, because then it's going to expand.
And in today's world, where we see the hybrid warfare taking over, the scenario you mentioned is even more realistic, because being aggressive all the way into Europe no longer takes a tank. It can take a bot, an army of bots, or
that's why I was talking about sharp power, right? Now Russia's main ambition, right, aim is to cause a disintegration within, using its disinformation propaganda machine, right? And while before it used soft power to win hearts and minds, now it does not even try to pretend it's like positive power, right? Now it's just going to attack democracies from inside. And we know that democracy is pretty weak in contrast to autocracy, because there are because there are certain rules followed by democratic countries and no rules followed by autocratic countries. That's why in this case we need a very urgent response to deal with this issue and fight autocracy, and especially fight sharp power using similar means like anti-sharp power, I would say, in order to develop resilience in our societies from inside, right?
Absolutely.
So this is very important, the development of this resilience. And what I see right now is this development of resilience in the Georgian society now on the ground, while we are protesting in the streets. And that's probably the only good news from Georgia.
So let's end on this positive note, that there is resilience and genuine grassroots democratization happening within the protest movement of Georgia. But as Lika mentioned, the recommendations are clear. We need to fight disinformation. We need to make sure that polarization is decreased, building the resilience from internal, and also EU help. There is a geopolitical and a genuine identity fight for Europeanness at stake, and if you can't work together on that, then you'll be lost once it's the other people's turn to ask for help. So at this point, our discussion has come to an end, and I would like to wholeheartedly take the opportunity to thank you, Lika, and thank you so much for taking the time to join me for this extremely relevant and very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Samuel.
So if you are interested in finding out more about the project and the people behind it, like Lika, accessing a summary of our key results, finding our research publication, all of you have to do is to visit our website, which is www.mediatized.eu, or subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on Twitter or X at mediatized_EU. Thank you.